Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of the Persian invasion / Persian Wars / one revolt, two invasions, all that shenanigans and stuff like that we talked about in class today. Now, big thing about it is we left off in one of our classes talking about this part, and then we got forward a little bit on one of our other classes, so it's not a big deal. It happens to the best of us. Not very serious. Let's move on with our lives, right? So the big thing about it, though, okay, going into it, is we left off in class talking about the second Persian invasion, right? That big invasion that's going to happen by land and by sea under the rulership of Xerxes the First, right? Son of Darius the First, who is going to decide to bring a massive army to try and destroy all the Greeks in a very large invasion for us, right? And of course, as we know also that this happened when they threatened the Spartans.
Oh, I've chosen my words carefully, Persian. Perhaps you should have done the same.
This is blasphemy. This is madness!
This is Sparta!
Exactly. This is Sparta. Blah. But the thing about it that we need to understand, though, is that what we did talk about in class is that the Spartans will die to every last man at the Battle of Thermopylae, but they do slow the Persians down long enough for Athens to evacuate their city, right? We know that the Spartans were heavily outnumbered by the Persians, about 6,000 to 200,000, and they were being led famously by King Leonidas, right? And King Leonidas, of course, is the guy in that clip that you just saw kick the Persian guy into that well, right? Which apparently actually might have happened in real life. They actually did kill the messengers and sent a head back in the basket. But the thing about it, though, okay, that you need to understand is that King Leonidas actually, fun fact, was not Gerard Butler, and he didn't have an 18-pack. He actually was 60 years old when the Battle of Thermopylae went down, which is like, man, you are old for a battle like that. But going into it, though, you have to understand, we're thinking to move forward, all right? But the second Persian invasion will ultimately end in 479 BC when the Greeks retreated, but they did bounce back, right? They earned huge victories at the Battle of Salamis because the Athenian navy actually sunk large contingencies of the Persian navy using the geography to their advantage, and then also the Battle of Plataea, right? Where yet again a Spartan army trounces actually a Persian army, again, using the geography to their advantage. Because we talked about this in, in 5th period, Victoria McCann was just like, yeah, there's a big difference between home field advantage, right? And that is very, very true, Victoria, right? The thing about it is, in the long run, is that the Greeks are going to end up winning. Persia loses, and they realize that they will never, ever take Greece, right? And that was the very last Persian invasion, and it kind of limited the growth of the Persian Empire into maybe North Africa further than that, but they were never going to be able to take Greece, right? Now, what is going to happen, though, is that Athens is going to decide to try and create a military protectorate, right? Or a military alliance known as the Delian League, right? Athens is going to form this thing known as the Delian League, which is supposed to be a military alliance to try and actually defend themselves from any future attack by Persia should one ever occur. Fun fact, it did kind of later on in the Peloponnesian War, but that's the story for later. So going into it, though, that you have to understand is that Athens is going to form this thing called the Delian League, right? And the Delian League, their mascot, of course, the mascot of the Athenians is this like goofy little owl thing and stuff like that. But the Delian League was formed by Athens with them at the helm, right? It was supposed to be a huge military alliance with Athens in charge, and they collected money from all of their members, right? As you can see by this map right here, their military alliance was pretty large, right? Like the Athens and the Delian League members was very, very large and actually covered most of the coastline of western Turkey, also known as Anatolia, and then also this coastline of Greece as well, right? Now going into it, though, they did collect money from the members that were actually a part of it, known as dues, right? There were dues that were actually sent, but the thing about it that Athens did say is they said that to join the Delian League, you must be in a democracy, right? You are forced to be in a democracy, and you cannot have an oligarchical government or a hierarchical government of any other type. You must have a democratic government, which is going to actually have voting and voting contingencies within inside of it. Now, this is going to make Sparta really upset because, one, they're like, we don't do alliances, right? Like, so we don't do that. That's lame. We don't do that. We just train each other to kill each other. So now, the Athenians, though, are going to be like, well, we didn't want you in the alliance anyway. Nah. And so this ironic part of this is that they actually came together to repel the Persian invasions, but then immediately after they were over, they kind of broke up. You know what I mean? And they go right back to their cultural things, and it is going to create so much of this. Right? A lot of beef that's going to get created right there. Now, going into it, though, we do need to understand that a lot of tension will grow from this Delian League, and it will lead to a very, very large hatred amongst Athenians and Spartans, which we should be forecasting or foreshadowing into the future that we can see a war on the horizon between those two, right? Athens and Sparta will eventually go to war together, or war against each other, due to these cultural differences, and then also due to a lot of different other reasons as well, including other alliances, other friendships made between. There's a big fight between these other two states called Corinth and Megara, but we'll talk about that later. But the end of the Persian Wars, though, does mark the beginning of our next time period that we do need to discuss, right? And we are getting into the classical period, right? We are now moving into our, wait, what? I can't number. Here we go. We're now moving into our 7th out of 8 of our Greek time periods that we're going to be studying. And the classical period is a very important one, right? And it's mostly defined by the growth of Athens, right? Now, some of you are probably talking to yourself and you're like, wait a minute, why just Athens? Is Sparta not going to have a classical period? No, they don't really have that. Or you got to have, classical tendencies and you got to make art and stuff, you know what I mean? And have, big intellectual movements to have a classical period. And Sparta's just, again, out there bullying each other and drinking blood soup and doing their own thing, right? Now, going into it, though, you have to understand is what this time period is defined as is a time when the Greeks achieved new heights in art, architecture, theater, and philosophy, right? This is a time period of great growth, and it is considered like a zenith of Greek culture, right? For those of you who don't know what zenith means, it means the apex or the tip top, like the most, right? Okay? Now, going into it, though, you need to also understand is that the state of Greece following the Persian invasions is that Athens is growing very rapidly. They are using money from the Delian League, and they have their military alliance going and humming right along, so they're growing at a very exponential rate. They're using a lot of this money also to add to their growing navy, right? Building more and more triremes as time goes on, right? Those big ships with the eyeballs painted on them and the bronze battering ram up front, right? And they also have no more fear of Persia, right? Persia seems like kind of like a distant thing in the background because they just don't believe that they will invade yet again to try and actually come at the Greeks on their home turf. And the Delian League, though, is starting to make some people a little bit upset right now. And so speaking of making people upset, though, even though it's large and in charge and the Delian League is getting very large, or much bigger, the Spartans, you still would imagine, would rise up and destroy Athens in a fiery blaze of fury, right? But what that actually didn't happen. Why didn't Sparta check Athens or call them out a little bit? A lot of it has to do with 2 different reasons, right? One, they had a really massive earthquake. Natural disasters can tend to stand in the way of large military constructs and kind of like going after somebody, right? And then during this process, when Sparta had an earthquake that actually hit, there are 4 main core villages that actually make up like kind of the city-state of Sparta in and of itself. A Helot rebellion also broke out as well. The Helots saw this as a chance to actually try and revolt against the Spartans because of the actual dishevelment and the, what's the word I'm looking for? The fact that the Spartans weren't able to actually repel them for a hot second, right? Now, the Spartan ethos to this is actually they're going to be like, oh, let's just kill all the Helots and get some more. And that's what they decide to do. They actually do quell that rebellion eventually, but they are left picking up the pieces of this earthquake for quite some time and unable to actually go off and fight Athens, right? While Sparta is left occupied dealing with this Helot rebellion and this earthquake and just killing all their Helots and then going off and fighting other little small conflicts to go get some more. So, they actually are, Athens is now going to be allowed to kind of leap forward under their very new leader, right? Now, their leader is going to use and capitalize on this kind of vacuum of a time, if you will, where they're not afraid of Sparta for a hot second, and use that time to develop Athens in a very artistic and philosophical and intellectual way, right? And this is known as the age of this leader, right? Now, the leader that we're talking about is very important to me, all right? Now, this leader is one of those people that I focus on a lot every single year because they're super, super important, all right? And his name, it needs to be said correctly, all right? It drives me nuts whenever kids say his name incorrectly, all right? His name is Pericles, all right? Not Pericles, all right? So if you roll up into my class and be saying Pericles, it's going to bother me, all right? So no, stop it, all right? So yeah, but the age of Pericles, okay, is going to be a very important one, and his entire essence kind of defines the classical period, even in and of itself, right? And so he's going to be the head man and the main archon that is actually going to be the guy that reforms Athens and actually picks up the pieces in the wake of the Persian invasions, because as you probably should remember, what happened to Athens at the end of the Second Persian invasion, it was burned to the ground, right? Of course, Xerxes and his armies came through after the Battle of Thermopylae and destroyed it, right? So Pericles is going to pick up the pieces, though, and he's going to build back Athens better than it ever was, right? Now, speaking of Pericles, though, we do need to also understand that my guy was elected Archon 29 times in a row, right? That means that the people of Athens voted for Pericles to be the leader of the Athenians, or at least one of the 9, and then he was elected Chief Archon multiple times, right? And he is also going to be the guy that kind of comes in and he's just like, we are not allowing tyrants to ever come to power ever again, right? And Pericles comes in as Chief Archon and decides to reform Athens in a progressive way and try to bring them to new heights, right? And the major accomplishments that were actually made underneath the era of Pericles were some simple ones at first, right? First and foremost, he built walls around Athens and around their naval base, right? Creating a more defensive structure to try and prevent from any future possible invasion, and also, just to prevent anybody from burning it to the ground ever again, right? So so that would probably help. The big thing of that, though, is he had the Acropolis of Athens rebuilt as well, and had a new statue of Athena built out of ivory and gold, right? A 40-foot tall statue of Athena was built on top of the Acropolis out of ivory and gold, worth in the neighborhood of billions of dollars. It's like $4.2 billion if you got your hands on it at this point. And unfortunately, we have no idea where it is. So like now, we believe that the Romans probably destroyed it. They have a tendency to do that and then melt things down and make little trinkets out of it and stuff like that. So going into it, that you have to understand is that this 40-foot tall statue of Athena worth worth billions of dollars, made out of ivory and gold, right? Literally, also by the way, ivory is elephant tusk. If you don't know what that is, it's like now but it's going to be placed also inside of a brand new building, a building known as the Parthenon, right? Now the Parthenon again is a very important structure. Okay, it is the religious temple that sits on top of the Acropolis of Athens and is considered the most important ruin in Athens in the modern era, right? The Acropolis Museum is very, very cool. If you ever get a chance to go to Athens in your life, you definitely should, right? And the Parthenon is such a major and important structure that was built underneath the reign of Pericles, that is also its architectural achievements is going to even inspire later on the White House, and what it looks like on the back end is actually literally modeled off the Parthenon, and so is the Lincoln Memorial, right? And the Parthenon is considered one of the peaks of Greek architecture ever. So do me a favor, highlight the Parthenon, right? And the Parthenon is that ruin that you see right there. Now, you can go see a full-fledged one. I'm going to throw up a picture of it right here real quick. You can actually go see that building right there. It's a fully, literally redesigned Parthenon. It is built to scale of, the actual original Parthenon. And you can actually go inside it, and you can actually see the statue of Athena inside there as well. Fun fact, though, guess where that thing is located? It's in Nashville, Tennessee. Oddly enough. Now, going into it, though, also, he's going to come in, Pericles, and reform the government, right? Now, particularly when he reforms the government, he gets them paid, right? Now, why is this important? Why is Pericles getting government workers paid such an important reform in the governmental elections and the government proceedings of ancient Athens? Well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that if you aren't getting paid for something, then you need to be rich to do it, right? Because you need to have enough money in the bank to be able to have this job. So he's going to make it so government workers actually get salaries, right? And he's going to make it so if you are elected to an office in Athens, you actually going to get paid for it. And this is believed to actually allow more middle class or lower class members to get elected to government positions because now they can afford to do so, right? So getting government workers paid is going to be a massively important thing, right? He also gives 3 free theater seats away to the poor. Now, this is a really big deal, right? Theater and the structure of theater in Athens is considered to be one of the biggest pastimes and most important cultural venues of any ancient Athenian that they would ever go to, right? Theater, the Greek tragedy, all of those things are going to be developed during classical Athens, right? Also, comedy will be invented inside of the Greek theater. Fart jokes will be invented in Greek theaters, which is hilarious, right? So now, they're going to be a very big deal, though. So going to the theater is a huge deal, right? And so if you were poor, you couldn't afford to go before Pericles, but he's going to begin to give theater seats away for free. And that thing right there is known as the Odeon of Pericles because he's going to build a massive Odeon as well. And an Odeon is basically a version of a theater that's meant more for poetry and singing. It's a little smaller and stuff like that. But he builds that, and that, of course, right there is the main theater of ancient Athens. As you can see, they were designed to actually reflect sound and try to make it so you could actually hear the performers at the very, very base, even without any kind of microphones or sound amplification. And fun fact as well, if some of y'all are wondering why I love theater so much and love the Greek theater and stuff like that, it's because it affects you on the daily basis. If you have ever joined or decided or looked at the symbol of the theater, which of course the 2 smiling masks, right? The one that is happy and the one that is sad, right? Well, the thing about it is ancient Greek theater actually is reflected off of that because they needed to change out masks to express their emotions. Because if you were going to be able to actually see the actors and their facial expressions from up here, which you couldn't, they actually had big stone masks that they would wear on their face and stuff like that when they would actually change them out depending on the scene and depending on the mood, right? And so actually it's a symbol that we actually see still in the modern era all the time, right? Now, another big thing about ancient Athens, though, also, is going to be that during the classical period, much to Pericles' chagrin, is going to also be the growth of Western philosophy. By the way, for those of you who do not know what chagrin means, it means the unfortunate, oh, dang it, I wish this didn't happen during my time. Because ironically enough, Pericles did not like the guy that we're about to talk about next very much, right? He didn't consider him he knew he was brilliant, he knew he was very smart and stuff like that. He just didn't love the things that he talked about, right? Now, going into it, though, classical Athens is going to be the birth of Western philosophy, okay? Now, for those of you who don't know what philosophy is, a philosopher, it translates directly from Greek, as a lover of wisdom, right? And philosophy is an intellectual trend, right? So philosophy is going to have its roots in ancient Greece and will expand throughout Western civilizations for the rest of Western civilizations in general. We still have modern day philosophers as well. Philosophy is all about thought experiments and trying to understand the psyche and the human world around us when you don't have scientific tools to actually explain them, right? Philosophers are going to also start doing a thing where they're going to turn away from the myths of gods and goddesses and stuff like that. And they want to try and use logic to explain the world around them, right? They want to try and figure out what is going on around us, what are we interacting with, why do we act this way, right? Why does my dog Pierre such a jerk, right? A philosopher might want to try and amplify and examine those things as well. Now, the guy who is considered the father of modern philosophy, or the father of philosophy, period, is that dude right there. His name is Socrates, right? Now, Socrates, funny enough, was not a wealthy guy. He actually was not born to a wealthy family either. His father was a doctor, and his mother was actually also a helper in his medical field and stuff like that. Not very educated. But the thing about it that you need to understand is that Socrates is actually born to a pretty poor family, right? And Socrates is going to be the very, very first philosopher, and he gains a lot of influence and a lot of attention because people believe genuinely that he was just brilliant, right? But he was educated by his mother. He knew how to read, he knew how to write. And the thing about it though is, ironically enough, through his entire career, he never actually wrote anything down. And he actually began to gain a lot of attention because he used to teach for free in the agora, right? In the agora of ancient Athens, he used to literally go around and just constantly do one thing in particular. He asked people questions and he criticized the government of Athens. Now, this would make Pericles pretty upset, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is that Socrates is considered to be one of the most brilliant people ever because he invented this thing known as the Socratic method, right? Now, in his hatred of democracy and his love of the Socratic method kind of go hand in hand because the biggest thing he's thought you need to do is Socrates believed that you need to analyze your own ignorance, right? That, for example, not knowing something is really okay, right? And it's actually important that you know that you don't know something, so you actually have a drive to go off and figure it out. And he thought that democracy was kind of similar to that, in fact, that he was people don't pretend that they know a lot about what's going on, and they go out and cast their votes in a very blind way. And he said that he believes basically that dumb people should not be voting on what should rule over the intelligent and the brilliant, right? He thought that voting was not a good idea, and this is actually a feeling that has been shared by many rulers and leaders of state throughout Western civilization's history. For example, Benjamin Franklin thought that people shouldn't vote because he was it's like a sheep deciding which wolf's going to eat him. That's a quote of his. But he also created the Socratic method as well. And what Socrates did with the Socratic method in the process of never writing anything down is he would just question people constantly, right? I highly advise that you do the Socratic method to your parents, right? And the Socratic method is meant to show someone their own ignorance, right? And to expose the things that they do not know. Because there's one guiding quote that Socrates always had, and he said, all I know is that I know nothing, right? So that I know nothing for sure without a shadow of a doubt, that we must question everything, that nothing is assumed to be true, right? That is one of the biggest cruxes of Socrates' entire philosophical stance, is that you should never assume or guarantee that something that has been told to you is true without investigating it on your own, right? Because all I know is that if you're asking me about something that I do not about, all I know is that I know nothing, right? And then literally people were like, wow, this man is brilliant, right? Because literally he's actually being one of the first people ever to come along and try to answer questions that we don't necessarily know. Is there good and evil? What is this? What is that, right? And he's going to start a trend, right, that actually, ironically enough, ended with his execution. Now, interesting little fact about this, though, is that Socrates apparently made everybody so angry and so mad in ancient Athens that literally it ends up leading to his execution. Legit, the guy literally told people to stop just following blindly the religion, stop focusing on the gods because they're probably not real, and if they are real, they're kind of jerks, you know what I mean? And he literally started questioning everything. Again, Socratic method, right? And so literally, because apparently he was leading the young away from the religion of ancient Greece, they referred to him as the gadfly of Athens. Athens, right? Now, the gadfly, or what a gadfly is, it's like a pestering fly, right? Like, I've seen a horse, like, try to, like, shake a fly off before or whatever, just kind of, like, constantly doing like that, right? That's a gadfly. A gadfly is something that's just like bzz, 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 or one that kind of like buzzes around you while you're trying to sleep, right? That's a gadfly, right? And so they literally convicted him guilty in front of a jury of his peers. He actually, in open court, was convicted guilty, and they actually were like sentenced him to execution. Now, interesting fact, a buddy of his was like, "Hey, Socrates, I can get you out of here. We can escape, and you don't have to die." And then he was just like, "Nah. No matter where I go, I'm going to piss somebody off, so I might as well just stay and die." And so he actually chose to stay and die, and they literally forced him to drink poison, right? And so Socrates was executed by the government of Athens for constantly asking questions, and he was forced to drink poison hemlock. What hemlock is it's a root that grows in the banks of rivers in Greece, and if you boil it, it's poisonous, right? So, and this actually is him right here, triumphantly about to take his poison, and then like pointing to the air, and this is a very famous Jacques-Louis David painting. It's one of my favorites, and he's actually one of my favorite artists. And so, and this guy right here, though, is going to be very important coming up because that's his main student, right? And so the thing that we need to understand, though, is, again, remember, Socrates taught for free in the Agora. Well, one of his main students was a guy named Plato, who is considered the first true philosopher, right? Socrates set the standard. What you need to understand about him is that he created the standard of questioning everything. But then Plato came along and took everything a step further, right? Where in the wake of Socrates never writing down anything, Plato wrote down 36 books. And I'm saying Plato, not Play-Doh, the stuff that y'all ate when you were kids. Plato wrote 36 books in total, all dialogues, right? And these dialogues mean it's basically people having a conversation and questioning the perceived intelligence or the perceived knowing of a thing, right? And also Socrates is in a ton of them, right? Like he's in a ton of these different dialogues that actually is, of course, Plato trying to analyze things in society and being like, is this the best way to rule our government? Is this the best way to make a friend? Is this the best way to like find beauty in the world? What is ugliness? Why do I think something's ugly? Right, let's tell you now. And the thing about that we need to understand about Plato is his guiding ideas, right? And one of his biggest things is he said, think more, right? We don't do enough thinking, right? We take way too many things for like a version of truth, right? Start questioning stuff. And this is something that he originally got from Socrates, right? And a big element of that is known as rationalism, right? Now, rationalism, what that means, all right? Rationalism is the concept of trying to deduce a problem using nothing but logic and reasoning, right? And of course, it has its limits. Rationalism has its limits, but remember, these are ancient Greeks. They didn't really have like beakers and Bunsen burners and science to actually figure this stuff out. But the thing about it is he said, avoid popular opinion, right? He basically equated popular opinion to a pack of wild horses dragging us around a city. That, like, if we're just allowing, like, popular opinion saying that, oh, this will make you happy, or this will be the right thing, or this will be that it'll actually probably end up killing us, right? And he said, instead of going with popular opinion, look inward and try to understand yourself, right? And that's what led to his famous quote called Know Thyself, right? It's kind of like self-therapy and looking inside yourself and being like, why do I feel this way? This is actually a Platonic view of the world that I try to practice all the time, and I try to figure out, like, am I actually mad at this person, or is this person just making me upset because I feel like they hurt my feelings, right? Like, so, like stuff like that, right? And like Plato said, know thyself. Don't follow other people's opinions, right? And also, he wrote other big dialogues as well. He's like, he tried to figure out the perfect person you fall in love with, apparently is a person that has qualities that you don't have, that you seek for yourself, right? He's tried to understand, like, oh, beauty also is a thing that you, like, you are revenant with because it's something that, like, kind of perfectly describes what you're looking for, right? And he also had opinions on fixing society. Now, this is a big one, okay? He wrote a book called The Republic, ironically enough, which is actually rulership by the people and does have voting and right that, but he actually hated democracy in it, and he basically said that the perfect king will either become a philosopher or the perfect king is a philosopher who becomes a king, right? And so he's basically saying that, like, basically leaders in leadership needs to be more monarchical, and it needs to be more picked of the more intelligent, because again, he hates democracy just like Socrates did, because he's like, I don't want dumb people picking who's in charge, right? So, like, now going into it though, also he opened a massive academy in Athens known as Plato's Academy, right? That actually you can see in this Renaissance painting right here, created in the 1500s, right? Actually painted around like 1508 by Raphael. It's set in Plato's Academy. Now, none of those philosophers were alive at the same time. It's a piece of Renaissance artwork, but I'm just saying, like, he opened a huge academy in Athens to educate anyone he could, right? And there's tons of people that came to his academy to learn as much as they could. And in this academy, he came up with things like his theory of forms and his allegory of the cave, which we'll talk about in class during the warm-up and stuff like that. It's basically just another image or another representation of his theories of rationalism and logic, right? Now, one of his main students that actually moved to Athens to go to his academy is a man by the name of Aristotle, right? Who's originally from Macedonia, right? Like, so now, like, think about it, that we'll talk about Macedonia a lot in class, right? But Aristotle was born in Macedonia, son to a doctor, right? So yeah, like, so, oh yeah, Socrates' dad was a lawyer, I think. Okay, we'll go back and I'll double check all that stuff. We'll talk about it in class, right? But he was born in Macedonia, son of a doctor. First major job was actually tutoring this guy that, no, I don't know if you've ever heard of him before. His name's Alexander the Great. We'll get into him a bunch in our next class. But he is going to move to Athens to work with Plato in his academy, right? And he's going to end up creating his own works, right? Now, the guiding ideas about, like, Aristotle that you got to understand, though, is when you think Western philosophy and you think philosophy, period, 9 times out of 10, Aristotle is the name that comes to mind, right? Because that's how famous this guy is, right? His works are much more based in scientific discovery and also much more related to the theories of rhetoric and writing and grammar than Plato's ever were. And that's why he gets a lot of Bill credit, right? He has too many theories to count and too many ideas to count, because the thing that you need to understand is he literally studied everything from art to friendships to elements, like all kinds of stuff. He theorized that the elements of the world were earth, air, fire, and water. He thought that that was like the early states of matter, right? He created rhetoric styles with writing known as ethos, logos, and pathos, which means like writing with your ethics, writing with logic, and then writing with feeling, right? And so like literally, he's like Aristotle is like every English teacher's dream, right? Like Miss Tax loves him, and then like I'm sure Miss like Hook loves him. You know what I mean? I bet like Miss Dantagna, Miss Tutu. I know Mr. Roddy loves this guy. All right, literally English teachers love him because of his entire rhetoric and writing style thing. But his biggest contribution to me, in my opinion, to the schools of philosophy is empirical study. Right now, like Aristotle's biggest contribution is he kind of set the foundation for science, because he basically said we learn by observing and by doing, right? Like, why does this phone fall to the ground? What is this force that's bringing it out of my hand and into my other hand, right? What is it causing it to fall? And that was his big thing, right? He wanted to try and observe different things, categorize things. And so, ironically enough, you could argue that Aristotelian logic branched itself into science, whereas Plato's thoughts and theories branched itself more into traditional philosophy with rationalism and logic, right? And so the big thing about that we're going to talk about in class, though, okay, we're going to start off with the fact that this golden age, right, is it a golden age at all? A time period where art, economies, and cultures are at their peak? Well, Athens is expanding and checking all those boxes, but who's it making super mad? The Spartans, right? We're about to talk about a war that's going to break out when we get back together in class, but I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.